So, a funny thing happened when I went to publish this newsletter. The Fed changed their GDP numbers right as I went to do it. So, I'm using the Atlanta Fed's GDP Now forecast tool, which will tell you a forward-looking forecast for the GDP. And it was originally forecast to be down 1% for the second quarter of 22, but now it's forecast to be down 2.1%. Yikes. So that's pretty amazing. All right, folks, it looks like a recession is on. The Atlanta Fed's GDP forecast is 1% down for the second quarter. Remember, a recession is a really technical thing. It's a decline in GDP for 2 quarters in a row. Now, whatever you do, don't panic just because there are a few lines on a chart that start moving down, okay? GDP is not the end-all, be-all of economic indicators or numbers, and in fact, it may not even be all that good. There's a lot of, debate in economic circles about that. But here's the thing. Something is happening in the economy, and now is your chance to prepare. So we have some ideas for what you can do to get ahead of the curve. All right, so I'm going to be honest, whatever is happening in the economy right now, it's a little bit frightening. And as I noted in the intro, the Fed revised their GDP estimate down a little bit. Now, this happened in like 12 hours, so things are moving quickly. Adam Tooze points out that personal expenditures are now below the trend, and consumer disposable income is at the lowest it's been since the pandemic. So the light is kind of flashing warning. Rocky road ahead. So let's share some ideas for how to stay in business, huh? Even if the ride gets a little bumpy. The first idea is be the best. It's cliche to quote Warren Buffett for business and financial advice, but it's a cliche because it works. Buffett was recently asked what to do to survive in an economic downturn if there's inflation and things get bad. And his advice is really simple. And he said this during the 2022 Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting. Be the best at something. You can't individually really do much to fight recessions, inflation, things like this, but there is something you can do to secure your own well-being. Just be exceptionally good. So his quote is, "The best thing you can do is to be exceptionally good at something." He mentioned professions like doctors and lawyers as examples, saying that people are going to give you some of what they produce in exchange for what you deliver. This is great advice. But I have to add a little caveat to our niche, right? There are a lot of ways to be exceptionally good at something in this industry. Just look at any really successful print shop and you're going to notice something right away. First, no two shops have the same business model. There's always a huge degree of variance, even between shops that do something fairly similar. Second, no two shops have the same niche. Shop A that serves softball teams in one part of the country probably looks pretty different than Shop B that serves baseball teams in another part, even though they're ostensibly kind of in a similar niche. No two shops excel at exactly the same things. So some shops are excellent consumer-facing wizards, and others are software wizards, and some are amazing at printing complicated jobs, and some are marketing masters, right? So everyone plays up their own strengths, hopefully. So the next idea is shore up cash flow and get customers off net terms. Let's say you have a great client, they take on 30-day net terms. They're super reliable, right? They order 4 times a month and each orders several $1,000s. This is like a dream client. They keep coming back, but you see slowly but surely this client is really accruing a huge balance on net 30 terms. Is this a business risk that you're comfortable with? There's no right answer here. I don't have the answer, but this is something you have to decide for yourself. Are net terms really worth the risk? After all, think about the structure of net terms. What's really going on here? Your shop gives the customer a multi-$1,000 loan with no interest, right? That's really what's happening. You're being a bank. And even worse, I think the customers that want the longest terms and place the biggest orders that could be the best for your business tend to also be really big, powerful businesses. We've heard that time and time again. For example, a to-be-named pharmacy company that's very large and in a lot of cities wanted net 90 terms. Can you handle that? I mean, some shops are happy to be sure, we'll loan this big company $30,000 essentially and buy a bunch of shirts and then print them for them. But others probably can't handle it. So our advice, get paid 100% down upfront every time. There's no reason not to do it. Customers expect it. We've talked about this at length before, so it's really something you can do. Next, carefully survey your fixed costs. If you've just kind of let it rip for the past few years and you haven't really carefully controlled costs, I don't think you're alone. With inflation and shortages, and there's like these kind of pressure chamber of cost increases coming down the tube, a lot of people just haven't had a lot of time to really carefully budget and check out what they're spending their money on. So now is probably the time to do that. I mean, if you don't already do that as a habit, then start thinking about things like insurance and leases, consumables, energy costs, subscriptions, whatever there is that you're constantly paying. You got to start categorizing it. One really nice strategy I've seen is to write out all these costs on a sheet of paper and just rank them as essential, nice to have, or not required. And, think about it this way. Essential costs are anything that would hamper business operations. You got to have a roof over your head. You got to have power. You got to pay those bills. Nice to have costs are things that, optimize or improve or make the quality of life a little higher at the shop, but they're not necessarily like really something you need. And then not required stuff are like luxuries, experiments, or even just like habits that you're not sure why you have. So those are usually where to start if you really want to cut back your fixed costs. Maybe you don't need to have coffee delivered every week. Next, consider new equipment purchases very carefully. While it's great to expand your business, adding capacity can mean more monthly payments, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you should cancel the purchase for the press that you've been planning for a year, or avoid upgrading your dryer even though you need the capacity. Look, don't skimp on tools that can actually get your production to the next level or make your shop the best, but do plan very carefully here. One strategy is to kind of rank equipment into 3 categories. So the first one would be bottlenecks. Anything that prevents you from printing faster or printing more goes in this category. So the most common example is a dryer, right? You have a dryer that's too small, you can't keep up with jobs, it's not fast enough, maybe you don't have a split belt dryer and you can't do 2 things at once. This is really something that you could pay to upgrade. That's a worthy upgrade. Another one is the computer to screen system. Speeding up screen making is huge, so fixing this allows you to actually do more with less. So anything that's like a bottleneck, that is something that you should still absolutely consider doing. Next, I think another category to think about tools in is essentials. So these are just things you need and use every day. You can't get rid of them. You have to keep paying for them no matter what. I think computers, your press, ink, all the things that really go into the day-to-day grind. And then the last category for equipment purchases is capacity expansion. So this isn't the same as bottlenecks. Think about things that are more, that let you do more with more. So an example would be a second press, right? It wouldn't be getting a dryer. So this is where you want to be careful. You can really blow through your budget when you say, hey, I want to expand my capacity in the middle of a recession. Maybe the capacity won't be there. But we really want to be wary here. Like, you can't future-proof your operation just by burying your head in the sand and thinking that there's no need to keep growing. That's not the case. But a recession can definitely make you reconsider where, how, exactly when, how much you're going to spend on these purchases. And remember, buying used, it's always an option. So the next thing is to avoid line extension and new services. Some of you may remember New Coke. It's a pretty classic example of line extension gone wrong. In a really recessionary environment, it's really tempting to do line expansion. This comes up time and time again. You already know what line extension is, even if you've never heard the term before. So line extension is, in its simplest form, taking the brand name of a successful product and putting it onto a new product line. Now, what would this look like in a print shop? Because I know that probably doesn't sound totally relevant. But let's say a shop is a really, really experienced screen printing operation. A recession hits, and so they mostly do high volume orders, and that starts to evaporate. They say, hey, look, we're getting a lot of small quotes for small orders, but we're not getting the big orders that we used to rely on. Why don't we dive in to on demand and just start making money that way? So this seems super smart, right? Just start chasing the money. But wrong. Invariably, the leader in any category is the brand that is not line extended, explaining recent Trout in their classic, The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. That's where this line extension idea comes from. So let me repeat that. The leader in any category is the brand that's not line extended. So The accumulated experience that the shop has is in screen printing. And yeah, on-demand printing utilizes like some of the same skills in the business, but it's a very different game. So I like to think of these line extensions kind of like an oasis in the desert. From far away, it looks great, makes a lot of sense. You want to do on-demand printing. Wouldn't that be great to get all those orders and start making all that money? But the reality, when you get a little closer, it's an illusion. It's just drawing you further away from where you really should be. But maybe you should start a new business? So the next thing is kind of funny, like line expansion's out, and in recessions, the number of new businesses falls. This is true for the last 2 recessions, and it makes sense, right? Why would you start a new business when you're struggling to pay your bills? The overall economy's in the can. Who does that? Well, there are actually 2 answers to this question. The first one is probably pretty obvious. You start a business in a recession because there's no business to go work for. Shout out to shops like Barrel Maker for making that happen in the last one. They worked for themselves. They sprung up and, did what they had to do because that was what there was to do. And the second answer is probably a little less obvious. You'd start a business in a recession because there's a lot less competition. And there's going to be actually a lot more opportunity for the people that are starting businesses. So during the boom of 2021, business creation rose astronomically. Like everyone starting a new print business was competing with a dozen other entrepreneurs doing the same thing for the same limited set of resources, blank goods, customers. And in a recessionary environment, it's kind of the opposite. You'd have the whole football field to yourself. So if you're itching to start a new business or enter a new niche or totally rebrand your shop and go in a new direction, a recession might be the opportunity you've really wanted. Silver linings, right? So the next thing is to build or fortify that emergency fund while you can. A business emergency fund is not something I would consider nice to have. It's pretty essential. Not every business has one. Not every person does. And I think everybody knows this. What happens in recessions can be, frankly, really brutal. The businesses that can't weather the storms don't. They're forced to liquidate equipment, lay off workers, cut production, you name it. But if you have a healthy runway, you can offer certainty to employees. I'd love to tell you that you should immediately have a 6-month runway in the bank, meaning that if you closed your doors tomorrow, you'd have 6 months to pay everybody the same salary and could just keep operating like you are now. But I know that's not realistic. I know that's probably almost impossible. The margins aren't there. Even with like a rock solid profit first system, a 6-month emergency fund is going to be a big, big chunk of change. So I won't suggest that. I'll just say that it's very nice to have that kind of money. And it's how a lot of big companies plan to weather this recession. Instead, I will simply say, if you don't have some kind of emergency fund set aside, and now you can start aggressively setting aside cash for that rainy day. Start small, but start. The next thing is identifying your riskiest customers. Each customer you serve carries different levels of risk. And risk can take a lot of forms for customers in the print game because it's kind of a risky business. So here are a few examples. Customers that are too small to make it worthwhile. We've long touted the value of minimum order quantities, and we advised you before to set a minimum price. But small customers and jobs can soak your business unless you are specifically set up to handle them. The time spent administering these jobs can make them almost worthless. The next type of customer is too big to lose. This is kind of the other side of the coin. Most print shops actually have a customer that's 20% of their revenue or more. This is just the Pareto principle in action. Knowing who your top customers are is really essential. If they are at risk, you're at risk. And also, if they're looking for an exit, you're at risk. So take care of those customers and make sure that they are doing well. Another risky customer is someone that's a bad fit for the business. Now, this is kind of the hardest one to define, but it is, I think, the riskiest. These customers just don't align with your values. Maybe you don't want to print political shirts, for instance, or maybe you do. They may not agree with how you run your business, and then they'll leave a nasty review. Maybe they'll be too demanding and soak your time and just be annoying and make you not want to work. But however you identify this group, the people that are a bad fit, be wary. They can really be damaging to the morale and the bottom line of your business, so look out. It doesn't intuitively make sense to start cutting down on your customer base as you head into a recession. I respect that. But let's put it another way. If you're loyal to a business and spend a lot of money with them, you probably expect a high level of service, even in a recession. If that business is stuck serving a dozen other customers and not doing a great job, your service will suffer as a result. You've probably experienced something like this. In a recession, it is business critical to know who your most important customers are and double down on serving them with the highest standard possible. Businesses are really willing to fight for dollars during recessions, and loyalty pays off big time. All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. That was this week's issue of the Weekly. Next time, we're going to talk about best piece of equipment that you can invest in now. I'm always listening for feedback, opportunities. I hope to hear from you. Shoot me an email, luke@printavo.com. See you soon.